So now we're going to go to our last keynote, Professor Mat Santamouris. I believe everyone in the room must know Matt. He's been here and doing a lot of important research for decades and decades, so it's not about the age though. So Professor Mat Santamouris is leading a figure in the field of energy and building physics with a special focus on enhancing the environmental sustainability of building environment. He holds the prestigious position of Annette Lawrence Chair in High-Performance Architecture at University of New South Wales, where he continued to push the boundaries of research in green building technologies and urban heat island mitigation strategies. With a prolific academic career, Professor Mat Santamouris has authored and edited over 50 books and more than 430 articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals and conference proceedings. His work is highly regarded globally, not only for its academic merit, but also for its practical applications in improving building energy efficiency, renewable energy resources in building, and the development of material for smart building appliances. Without further ado, please join me to welcome Matt.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you so much for the invitation. Is really urban overheating a real problem? Yes. Actually, there are about 13,000 overheated cities around the world. There is about 1.7 billion people living under very severe overheating. Since the 80s, the number of overheating hours in the world has increased by a factor of 3. During the last 10 years, in China and in India, heat wave exposure has increased by about 500 million person days per year. Is there an important impact of overheating? Yes, there is an extremely important impact. First, it increases the energy consumption for cooling. It increases the peak electricity demand, obliging utilities to build additional power plants. It decreases the efficiency of power plants, but at the same time, it has very important impact on the environment, as it increases the concentration of ground level ozone and also the emission of power plants. It has a very important impact on health because it increases heat-related mortality and morbidity. And unfortunately, it has a very serious impact on mental health, but also it affects the cognitive performance of people, the human productivity, and also the quality of life of low-income population. Do we have enough evidence about it? Yes. During the last 10-15 years, we have collected a lot of data about it. And we know now that in average, each one of us, it pays about 240 kilowatt hours per year because of the urban overheating. Of course, in some places it is higher, in some other places it is lower. Another important impact, it has to do with the peak electricity demand, because it obliges utilities to build additional power plants. And these additional power plants operate just for a few days per year or a few weeks per year, and this increases the price of electricity. At the same time, it decreases the efficiency of power plants. We know now that for each degree of temperature increase, the efficiency of thermal power plants and of nuclear power plants decreases by 0.6% per degree of temperature increase, which means that during a day that we may have a heat wave, 10 degrees of temperature increase, for example, the efficiency of the power plant may decrease by 6%. And this is really very high. But it's not just that. It increases very much the cost of electricity. Do we have enough evidence? Yes. I give you some data from Europe. For example, the price of electricity during a heat wave in France, during the heat wave of 2022, has increased by from about, let's say, 50 euros per megawatt hour to about 2,000, let's say, euros per megawatt hour. Same data also for Texas. It has increased by 250, let's say, 250 times, I'm sorry. And unfortunately, this cost really, it goes directly to the consumers. It is characteristic, for example, that in Germany during the 2016 heat wave, the additional cost because of the lower performance of the power plants was close to 16 million of euros. The consumers, they pay 71 million of euros, which means that the utilities, they gain because of the overheating. And we are paying, let's say, for that. But it's not just that. Temperatures affect very much the performance of the grid. And this affects very much the provision of electricity. It is characteristic that during the last 5-6 years in the United States, very recent, the, let's say, number of blackouts has increased by 151%. It is very characteristic also that a recent blackout 2-3 years ago in northwestern Pacific has really resulted in 600 additional deaths, about 3,500 additional emergency hospital admissions, and hundreds of thousands of people without electricity. This is a very serious problem. A part of the energy problem, unfortunately, overheating affects very much the concentration of the pollutants, especially of the ground level ozone. The ground level ozone is a killer. And when temperature is higher, together with higher solar radiation, because of the photochemical, let's say, reactions in the atmosphere, we have a much higher concentration of ozone. Do we have an important increase of the concentration of ozone? Yes. In average in the world, during the last 10 years, the average concentration has increased by about 15%. In some places, officially, for example, in China, in the 150 bigger cities of China, the concentration of ozone has increased by 49%. And if you believe that this is not a problem, the World Health Organization estimates that we have about 430,000 deaths per year because of the higher concentration of ozone. And unfortunately, the forecast shows that we may have an increase to about 50% by 2050 because of, let's say, the higher concentration of ozone. But it's not just that. We know quite recently that for each degree of temperature increase, because of the extended operation of the power plants, the, let's say, concentration of pollutants or the release or emitted pollutants increased by about 3.5% in average. So during, let's say, a day with 10 degrees of temperature increase, we have 35% more pollutants coming from the power plants. It's not just the energy and the environmental impact. Overheating affects very much low-income population. Low-income population is living in the warmest part of the cities, and the quality of their houses or their, let's say, homes is very bad. They are not protected. As a result, indoor temperature, it is really much, much higher than, let's say, the thresholds or the comfort standards. And this creates important problems to the quality of life, but also important problems regarding the energy provision. For example, according to the European Parliament, a recent report, only 2%, in Portugal, a country of the European Union, only 2% of the cooling needs are met by the low-income population. Or in Greece, with another report, low-income population is paying about 200% more for energy than, let's say, the average, because they used to live in non-proper houses. But unfortunately, it's not just that. And if you believe that this is something that happens in let's say, developed countries, this is not the case. For example, recent studies that we have performed in Western Sydney, in about 110 low-income houses, people is living under 40 degrees during, let's say, the summer period, not during a heat wave. And during the winter period, indoor temperature was between 5 to 7 degrees. But the worst is that because they like to be protected and they close windows, doors, everything, the concentration of CO2 was 4 times higher than, let's say, the threshold. So these people is living under very high temperatures and very high pollution. Unfortunately, really, this brings us to a very serious problem, the problem of health and comfort of low-income population. Actually, to give you some statistics, the heat-related mortality, because, let's say, of high temperatures, heat-related mortality of low-income population is, in average, 3.7%, while for, let's say, the high-income population is 2.1%. So low-income population is paying an important penalty, health penalty, because of the overheating. And another important example is that in New York is 50% black population and Hispanics 50% white population. Heat-related mortality in New York is almost the double for the black population than for the white population, because they are living in areas of higher temperature. Or the risk of mortality in the United States in general is by 220% higher for the black and the Hispanic population than, let's say, for the white population. So the social dimension of overheating is extremely important and has not to be, let's say, forgotten. And this brings us to the very serious problem, the problem of health and the impact of the impact of higher temperature on health. The relation and the association between higher temperatures and health or heat-related mortality is not something simple. It's not something linear. Temperature, mortality, a linear line. No. Depends on many parameters. Depends on demographic parameters, socioeconomic parameters, health infrastructure parameters. And those that they are more affected is the low-income population, aged population, those that they have health problems, etc., etc., etc. We don't have data from developing countries because they don't have statistics. But we know from the developed countries that, in average, those that they are living in the, let's say, warmest part of the cities, they present 6% higher risk of heat-related mortality than those living in, let's say, the coolest part of the city. And we have much more evidence about the impact of overheating on mortality. For example, in Europe, heat-related mortality for aged population above 65 years has increased by 85% between 2004 and 2021. And this is the official statistic. At the same time, according to the World Health Organization, we have about 500,000 deaths per year because of the overheating. And I'm afraid that this is a very small and non-accurate number because we don't have statistics about, let's say, the developing countries. What about the future? The forecast coming from different sources, Lancet, one of the most important and accurate, let's say, source, shows that for specific areas of the world, for example, Southern Europe, also Southeast Asia, and Africa, the overheating may kill perhaps millions of people. Nobody can forecast the future, but it is evident that we may have a very important increase in the future. And it's not just the mortality. Overheating affects very much mental health. And this is something new. This is something that we have learned during the last 5 years because of the statistics we have now. See, for example, how, let's say, schizophrenia, it's not working. Anyway, schizophrenia or other, let's say, disorders increase as a function of temperature. There's a tremendous increase of hospital admissions because of mental health as a function of temperature. And this, of course, it has to do with the data all around the world, and these are the data for Australia. See, for example, what is, and this is from Adelaide, see what is happening during, let's say, the days of higher temperature about mental health. This is a very serious problem. To understand, the actual budget of mental health in the world is close to $2 to $3 billion. It is expected by 2050 that the total budget to be spent for mental health problems will be close to 50 billions. So this is one of the major problems we may face in the future. And who is paying the penalty of mental health? The low-income population. This is a very recent study published a month ago, I think, in London, that shows really the mental health problems as a function of income. That the low-income population in the left has much, much higher needs, really, for, let's say, assistance, 260% higher need for mental health assistance than high-income population. And unfortunately, it's not just that. Another recent study that has, let's say, associated suicide rates against temperature, for example, that in Mexico, for each degree of temperature increase above 28 degrees, suicide rate is increasing by 2.1%, while in the United States is increasing by 0.7%. Last week, we had another study published by, let's say, some researchers in New South Wales. And they shown that for each degree above 27 degrees, suicide rate in New South Wales is increasing by 1.5%. This is very important and has to be, let's say, considered. And this brings us to another important issue, the problem of cognitive performance and the impact of higher temperature on the cognitive performance of people. There are two major schools in the world. The Nordic European, which they like the engineering approach, and let's say another school, which is mainly based in Australia, about the association between temperature and cognitive performance. According to this, let's say, inverted U-value method that is mainly developed in the Nordic countries, for each degree above 25 degrees, we are losing 2% of our cognitive performance. It's not so simple, because there are so many confounders around it. But this is what really research have shown. But if you don't really believe to this, I'd like to show you, for example, the results of, let's say, the PISA exercise. PISA is a world exercise where all the countries are participating with exactly the same exams, mathematics, language, etc. Millions of people, millions of students, exactly the same conditions. What it is found is that the higher the temperature of the classroom or of the area where we have the exams, the lower the cognitive performance. And you see the association. There's a tremendous relation between temperature and, let's say, the cognitive performance. And research has shown, really, that cognitive performance is very much affected if really the student or anyone, it is really exposed to higher temperature during the last 4 years. And for each day of exposure above 32 degrees, he is losing 1.2% of his cognitive performance. And this is not something that is really evaluated with 50 people. This is something that is found with millions of students in the United States, in India, in China, etc. I'd like to tell you something which is very important. The PISA, let's say, results show that the Brazilians, which of course they participate at higher temperatures, they have 6% lower cognitive, let's say, performance than the Koreans because of the higher temperature. And also, the official results from the United States shows that by 2050, the American students, they will lose 10% of their cognitive performance because of the overheating. And other studies, I'm sorry about the bad news. I have some good news later. Studies that have to do with millions of people shows that our performance is really decreasing tremendously when temperature is above 30 degrees. At 40 degrees, the performance of, let's say, people is decreasing by about 60%. Recently, when really temperature in Delhi, in India, was for about 7-8 days above 50 degrees, the Indian government has announced that they had a decrease of the performance and, of course, a decrease of the income by 90%. Can you understand what does it mean for a country to lose 90% of the productivity? It is tremendous. Or if you like, actually, the losses, and this is official, because of the lower performance during, let's say, the overheating period, are close to $311 billion. And unfortunately, this will increase close to 2.3 trillion by, let's say, 2050, not 2010. And actually, United States is losing, let's say, between 0.15 to 0.25% of their GDP for each, let's say, degree of temperature increase during the summer period. This is what is happening now in brief. What's about the future? What do we expect in our cities? All forecasts shows that, unfortunately, the ambient temperature may increase during the night between 3 to 5 degrees, depending on the area, and 1 to 2 degrees during, let's say, the day period. It's not the same all around the world, but this is, let's say, the average. And unfortunately, this will affect more the low-income countries or the developing countries, those that they are not responsible for the overheating. India, for example, Nigeria, Indonesia, etc., etc., etc. Actually, 9% of the world population is living under temperature that we never had in the planet Earth in the recent years when human beings are here. So we're expecting that by 2050, more than 2.5 billion people will live under, let's say, serious overheating. And this will affect more the low-income population. The forecast shows that, let's say, the number of days above 35 degrees in the low income or the developing, let's say, countries will be 83, while for, let's say, the high income, let's say, areas will be 16. So there is a very important stratification and, of course, a difference of impact between, let's say, the low income and the high income population. And this brings us to the major energy problem of the future. Yes. Cooling. We expect a tremendous increase of the energy consumption for cooling, up to 2,000%. And of course, this will create a serious problem for, let's say, many countries. And of course, air conditioning may be a serious, let's say, serious issue and a serious, let's say, solution for the problem. But who benefits from air conditioning? Recent studies have shown, and this is the penetration of air conditioning in 4 different countries, developing countries, as a fraction of income. Those that they benefit from the air conditioning is the high-income population, not the low-income population, where really air conditioning is not penetrating. So these are the bad news. Do we have good news? Yes. During the very last years, we have developed very important mitigation technologies that may decrease the temperature of the cities. New materials, which present up to 15 degrees lower surface temperature than the conventional materials. But the real revolution is with the so-called supercool materials that present up to 5, 6, or even 10 degrees lower surface temperature than the ambient temperature. And here you see, for example, the results of the testing we have performed in, let's say, the Australian desert. And during the day, under the sun, in the desert, Alice Springs, and under very, let's say, high temperatures, these materials present up to 5, 6 degrees lower surface temperature than the ambient one. These are natural air conditioners. And when these materials are combined with some advanced, let's say, fluorescent technologies, we may have color materials which present, let's say during the day, up to 10 degrees lower surface temperature than the ambient one, while they present, and these are measured data, 4 to 5 degrees lower surface temperature red materials than the conventional white materials. So we have really mitigation technologies that really present up to 15 or 20 degrees lower surface temperature than what we have, let's say, 15 or 20 years ago. Do we have applied these materials? Yes. Actually, in the big project that we have in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, by using these materials and some other mitigation technologies, we have succeeded to decrease the surface temperature, the ambient temperature by 4 degrees, and decrease also the energy consumption by 35%. Also, in a recent study that we have performed for the Department for DICER, we found, for example, that we may decrease the energy consumption for cooling in Sydney between 30 to 50% if really these materials are used in the built environment. But the most important is that these cheap materials, when applied on the roof of low-income households, low-income houses, may decrease the ambient temperature up to 10 degrees. So instead of having people living at the 40 degrees, we may have just 30 degrees indoor. I'd like to conclude discussing a little bit about the future. The letter sent by the director of NASA, April 2024 in Nature, says the following. Until now, the overheating was 0.2 degrees per 10 years. In 2023 and 2024, the overheating was 0.2 degrees per year. And according to the director of NASA, we are in uncharted waters. And if really we wish to face the problem of the overheating, especially in cities, the development of the technology is not enough. Why? Because the technology is here, but the technology, in order to be implemented, has to be monetized. We need to have the, let's say, financial tools that will accelerate the penetration of the technology in the market. So we have to monetize the impact of overheating in our cities, which means that we have to establish a new market for, let's say, cities, where those that they increase the temperature, they have to pay, and those that really decrease the temperature, they have to benefit. And this is my last slide. We have a very serious problem of the overheating, and this has a very important impact. But we have developed mitigation technologies. We know how to decrease the temperature of cities. There are more than 220 let's say, projects around the world that we have succeeded to decrease the temperature up to 2.5 degrees. Why really this is not widely implemented? Because those that really they govern us, they like simplistic solutions. Just plant trees and solve the problem. Not at all. You don't solve the problem at all. You create more problems. So this, let's say, simplistic approach do not really help. The problem of overheating and the implementation of mitigation technology is a multidisciplinary problem and asks for an holistic approach. It's not enough that you have, let's say, engineers, environmentalists, let's say medical doctors, etc., each one working on different subjects. It needs really to be, let's say, in an holistic approach. Two things. Big problem, important, let's say, impacts, existing solutions, but we need to have and develop new, let's say, financial tools, and we have to convince those that they decide about the implementation. Thank you very much.